Hey guys, welcome to the fog-choked alleys of Victorian London. That London you imagine perpetually draped in a pea-soup fog so thick you could spread it on your remarkably flavourless toast. A place where your bathtub, should you be so fortunate as to possess one, likely shares its plumbing with the local spectral population. So before you settle in under your weighted blanket and thank God for plumbing, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy drifting off to boring history, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and whether your, hopefully, ratless bedroom would have made a Victorian jealous. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from around the world, so settle in, dim the gas lamp of your mind, perhaps light a lavender candle, let the anxieties of our modern age, the endless scrolling, the shrill notifications, fade into the background. Tonight, we journey to a time when a cough could be a death sentence, when wallpaper shimmered with arsenic green, and when your greatest fear might be the unsettling glow emanating from your drinking glass. Take a slow, deep breath. Feel the weight of that imaginary soot settling in your lungs. Notice the phantom itch of perpetually damp hair. Yes, you're now a Victorian Londoner, and your day is about to begin. The first intrusion upon your slumber is not the gentle chirping of birds, unless of course you count the scrabbling of unseen creatures within the walls as avian song. No, your rude awakening comes in the form of a costermonger bellowing his wares in the street below, a voice raw from the damp air and the sheer determination to make a meagre living before the rest of this teeming metropolis fully stirs. His cries penetrate the thin walls of your lodgings, mingling with the muffled coughs and restless sighs of your fellow inhabitants. You peel back the coarse linen sheets of your bed, a lumpy landscape sculpted by a mattress stuffed with horsehair, a material that, despite its best intentions, seems to retain every indentation and damp patch it has ever encountered. You share this small room, not just with the aforementioned unseen fauna, but perhaps with siblings, cousins, or even paying lodgers, their presence a constant reminder of the cramped reality of Victorian life. Personal space is a luxury few can afford. The chamber pot in the corner offers a stark choice. Use it and endure the lingering aroma, or brave the journey to the outhouse. This communal facility, located some considerable distance away and perpetually damp, is often locked by a neighbour with a peculiar sense of territoriality. The key, it seems, is always just out of reach, much like a decent bar of soap. Speaking of cleanliness, the notion of a daily bath is laughable. If you belong to the more privileged strata of society, you might indulge in a weekly ritual of lukewarm water, hauled in buckets and heated over a meagre fire. This is a significant undertaking, often involving the entire household and resulting in a shared bathwater experience that prioritizes efficiency over hygiene. For the vast majority, however, washing is a more localized affair, a splash of cold water to the face, a cursory wipe of the hands. This is the extent of your daily ablutions. Everyone quietly pretends not to notice the ingrained grime beneath fingernails and the faint sheen of city dust that clings to clothing. It's simply a part of life, like the pervasive smell of coal smoke and the distant rumble of iron wheels on cobblestone. You might attempt to tidy yourself before a cracked and tarnished mirror, its silvering eroded in patches like a forgotten dream. Your reflection reveals a face already bearing the marks of the city, a slight pallor, perhaps a hint of shadows beneath the eyes from restless sleep and the ever-present low hum of anxiety. You finger the collar of your nightshirt, already feeling the day's grime beginning to settle anew. One might almost find a dry chuckle escaping, realising that the lack of hygiene standards fostered a certain camaraderie. After all, everyone was equally, if subtly, unclean. It was a great equaliser, if nothing else. A quiet resignation settles over you. The summons to breakfast is usually a shout from downstairs, a curt announcement that signals the commencement of the day's nutritional gamble. You descend the narrow, creaking staircase, the air growing thick with the mingled scents of stale bread and weak tea. A truly melancholic aroma. The breakfast table, often a scarred and unsteady affair, is set with a collection of mismatched crockery. Your portion typically consists of a slice of toast, invariably burnt at the edges and pale in the centre, accompanied by a smear of a substance vaguely resembling jam. Its flavour is indeterminate, a greyish sweetness that offers no discernible fruit and leaves a faintly metallic aftertaste. You suspect its ingredients include more turnip than strawberry. If fortune smiles upon you, or perhaps if the household finances are momentarily less dire, you might find a boiled egg amongst the offerings. However, cracking its shell is always an exercise in trepidation. Will it be fresh, or will it harbour the faint sulphurous whisper of decay? It's a morning lottery with surprisingly high stakes. The centrepiece of the Victorian breakfast, the undisputed champion of this meagre spread, is tea. Weak, tannic, and often lukewarm, it is nonetheless the lifeblood of the nation. Poured from a chipped teapot that perpetually drips, it is the only warm comfort on an otherwise bleak culinary landscape. Sugar, if available, is a precious commodity, and milk is often watered down to an alarming degree, lending the tea a thin, bluish hue. Conversation at the breakfast table is usually sparse, punctuated by the clinking of cutlery and the slurping of tea. There is a weariness in the air, a sense of quiet resignation to the day ahead. The weight of expectation, of societal obligation, hangs heavy even before the sun has fully risen, assuming, of course, that the omnipresent fog permits the sun to make an appearance at all. You sip your tea slowly, the lukewarm liquid doing little to dispel the chill that seems permanently lodged in your bones. You nibble at your burnt toast, its dryness requiring copious amounts of the watery beverage to render it vaguely palatable. You glance at your fellow diners, their faces etched with the same blend of fatigue and stoicism. Perhaps this Spartan breakfast fostered a certain resilience. After all, if one can face a day fueled by burnt bread and questionable jam, one can surely face anything. Or perhaps it simply contributed to the general air of national malaise. You may never be entirely sure. The act of dressing in Victorian London is less about personal expression and more about preparing for a relentless onslaught of damp, dirt, and societal scrutiny. Layers are your constant companions, a bulwark against the pervasive chill that seems to emanate from the very stones of the city. For women, the process begins with long underwear, often made of coarse cotton or wool that scratches uncomfortably against the skin. Over this come layers of petticoats, voluminous skirts designed to create the fashionable silhouette of the era, while simultaneously trapping any available warmth and quite a bit of street dust. The inevitable corset follows, a restrictive garment that moulds the torso into the desired shape, often at the expense of breathing and internal organ comfort. Mastering the art of lacing oneself into a corset is a daily trial, a silent battle against whalebone and tightly drawn strings. Outerwear consists of more layers of wool, dresses with high necks and long sleeves, shawls, and perhaps a heavy cloak if the elements truly threaten. The colour palette tends towards the sombre, blacks, greys, and muted browns, practical choices in a city where anything lighter would be instantly stained by soot and mud. For men, the ensemble involves similarly weighty fabrics: long johns, thick trousers, a waistcoat and a jacket or frock coat. Starched collars and tightly knotted cravats add another layer of constricting formality. Hats are essential, not merely as protection from the elements, but as a crucial component of social presentation. The notion of having a different outfit for each day is largely a fantasy for most. Garments are expensive, and washing them is a laborious and infrequent task. Your attire for the week is likely the same ensemble, perhaps with the occasional change of a shirt or collar. No one particularly notices, as everyone else is similarly attired in their own enduring layers. The overall effect is one of muted uniformity, a visual reflection of the era's emphasis on social order and decorum. If it is raining, and in Victorian London it very often is, your long skirts will act as sorrowful sponges, soaking up rainwater and street detritus with remarkable efficiency. The hems will become heavy and damp, clinging to your legs with a clammy embrace. Men's trouser cuffs will fare little better, accumulating mud and grime with every step. You pull on your boots, heavy and often ill-fitting, their leather dulled by constant exposure to the wet pavements. You adjust your shawl, pulling it tighter against the damp air. You glance at your reflection, a figure shrouded in layers, ready to face another day in the perpetually grey landscape. This elaborate layering served as a form of emotional armour as well as physical protection. Wrapped in wool and societal expectation, you might better face the discomforts and judgments of the day. Or maybe it just made everyone slightly damp and perpetually itchy. The subtle, pervasive weight of expectation guides your every step. Having dressed for the day's tribulations, you might turn your attention to the matter of personal hygiene, a concept that existed in a rather rudimentary state for most Victorians. While the wealthy might possess toothbrushes made of bone with boar bristles, which themselves harboured a rather unsettling array of microscopic life, the average Londoner's dental care was a far more improvisational affair. Brushing, if it occurred at all, might involve rubbing the teeth with a piece of rough cloth dipped in soot or salt. Some favoured crushed brick dust, an abrasive method that undoubtedly removed surface stains along with significant amounts of enamel. The primary goal was often simply to mask the more offensive odours, rather than to promote actual dental health. The concept of preventative dentistry was largely unknown. Cavities were considered an inevitable part of life, a natural consequence of indulging in sugary treats, if one could afford them, and the general lack of understanding regarding oral bacteria. The consequences were often dire: chronic toothache, abscesses, and the eventual loss of teeth were commonplace, leading to a population with noticeably compromised smiles and tendency to mumble. When a toothache became unbearable, the options were limited and terrifying. Dentistry as a profession was still in its nascent stages, and qualified practitioners were few and far between for the working classes. More likely, one would seek the services of a local barber surgeon or even a travelling tooth drawer, individuals whose methods were often crude and whose understanding of anatomy was optimistic at best. A typical dental extraction involved little in the way of anaesthesia beyond perhaps a shot of cheap gin or a strong dose of stoicism. You would be held down, the offending tooth located with a rusty pair of forceps, and then wrenched out with a speed that prioritised expediency over comfort. The pain was often excruciating, and the risk of infection was significant. Many preferred to simply endure the agony of a rotting tooth rather than face the horrors of Victorian dental care. Breath, as a result of these less than ideal practices, was often a source of considerable social anxiety, though rarely openly discussed. The combination of decaying teeth, questionable diets, and the general lack of effective oral hygiene contributed to an olfactory landscape that was, shall we say, complex. The invention of commercial mouthwashes was still some time away. You might run your tongue over your own teeth, feeling the familiar roughness and perhaps a twinge of discomfort. You consider the options for addressing any burgeoning dental issues and decide, not for the first time, that perhaps the pain is not quite bad enough to warrant intervention. This widespread dental misery fostered a certain appreciation for soft foods, or perhaps it simply contributed to the pervasive air of unspoken suffering that seemed to hang over the city like the perpetual fog. More often than not, it seemed people had more cavities than secrets. Having navigated the treacherous waters of morning hygiene, the Victorian Londoner faced the stark realities of daily labour, or, for some, the equally demanding labour of appearing not to labour at all. The social strata of the city dictated one's occupation, and the spectrum ranged from the brutal toil of the working classes to the constrained idleness of the privileged. For the countless children of the poor, work often began before dawn and continued long after dusk. Chimney sweeps, some as young as 5 or 6, were forced to clamber up narrow soot-filled flues, their small bodies covered in grime, their lungs choked with dust. Factory children toiled in noisy, dangerous mills, their nimble fingers risking injury in the relentless machinery. Their childhood was a fleeting memory, sacrificed to the insatiable demands of industry. Domestic service employed vast numbers of young women, many of whom lived in the cramped basements or attics of the houses they served. Housemaids endured endless scrubbing, cleaning and fetching, their days a monotonous cycle of drudgery. Sleep was often snatched in stairwells or on hard cots, their lives governed by the strict rules and capricious whims of their employers. For the working-class man, the options were equally arduous, labouring on the docks, driving carts through the crowded streets, or toiling in factories, mines, or construction sites. Injuries were commonplace, safety regulations were virtually non-existent, and the threat of illness loomed large. The reward for such back-breaking work was a meagre wage, barely enough to keep body and soul together. The burgeoning middle classes faced a different kind of exhaustion. Men toiled in offices, shops and counting houses, navigating the complexities of trade and commerce. The pressure to succeed, to provide for their families, weighed heavily upon them. Fainting spells and nervous afflictions were not uncommon, a testament to the stresses of Victorian ambition. Job security was a fragile concept, and the fear of financial ruin was a constant undercurrent in their lives. For the ladies of the middle and upper classes, work took a more performative form. Bound by societal expectations, their days were often filled with managing the household, overseeing servants, and engaging in ladylike pursuits, such as needlework, painting, or playing the pianoforte. Yet, beneath the veneer of genteel activity, often lay a profound sense of constraint and boredom. Denied meaningful engagement with the wider world, many suffered from what was euphemistically termed female hysteria, a catch-all diagnosis for a range of emotional and physical ailments stemming from repression and lack of autonomy. You might find yourself engaged in one of these myriad forms of labour, or perhaps you are one of the fortunate few for whom the primary occupation is the delicate art of maintaining one's social standing. Whatever your station, the day is likely to be long, demanding, and punctuated by the ever-present sounds and smells of the city. This strict division of labour created a highly efficient, albeit deeply unequal society. Or perhaps it simply resulted in widespread misery and stifled potential. It is a question that continues to echo through the annals of history. The backdrop to all aspects of Victorian life was the relentless and often miserable weather. It seemed as though the sun had taken an indefinite leave of absence, replaced by a perpetual drizzle, thick fog, and bone-chilling dampness that seeped into everything. Rain was a constant companion, turning the unpaved streets into muddy quagmires and rendering sidewalks treacherous. Umbrellas, cumbersome and often ineffective, offered little real protection against the persistent downpour. Clothing, as previously noted, absorbed moisture with enthusiasm, leaving one feeling perpetually clammy and cold. The infamous London fog, a dense yellowish miasma born of coal smoke, industrial pollution, and atmospheric conditions, was a force to be reckoned with. It descended without warning, reducing visibility to mere feet and lending the city an eerie, spectral quality. Navigation became perilous, and the air itself felt heavy and suffocating, coating lungs and surfaces alike with a fine layer of soot. Pedestrians moved like shadowy figures, their voices muffled by the oppressive gloom. Housing conditions for the majority of Londoners only exacerbated the misery of the weather. Overcrowding was rampant, with entire families often crammed into single rooms in dilapidated tenements. Ventilation was poor, and the air within was often stale and close, thick with the accumulated odours of unwashed bodies, cooking fumes, and damp. Mould was a ubiquitous presence, flourishing in the perpetually humid conditions and staining walls and ceilings with dark, creeping patterns. Draughts whistled through ill-fitting windows and under poorly sealed doors, making it virtually impossible to maintain a comfortable temperature indoors. In winter, homes were frigid, the meagre warmth from a small coal fire quickly dissipating into the damp air. In summer, the lack of ventilation turned dwellings into stifling ovens. Windows, often single-paned and rattling in their frames, frequently frosted on the inside during the colder months, obscuring the already limited daylight. Some, huddled around a flickering fire, whispered of strange patterns forming in the ice, fleeting glimpses of something else. The very structure of many buildings seemed to groan under the weight of the city's misery. Floorboards creaked ominously, plaster crumbled, and the ever-present dampness fostered a sense of decay that permeated every corner. Sleep, when it came, was often fitful, disturbed by the city's murmuring lullaby of industry. The distant clatter of hooves, the mournful cries of street vendors, the persistent drumming of rain on the roof. You might find yourself huddled by a weak fire wrapped in layers of damp clothing, watching the condensation gather on the inside of your window pane. The air is heavy with the smell of mildew, and a persistent draught chills the back of your neck. These grim living conditions fostered a strong sense of community among those who shared them. Or perhaps it simply made everyone slightly more susceptible to illness and despair. The walls, it often seemed, held more damp than plaster and more sorrow than stories. The simple act of obtaining water for drinking and washing in Victorian London was fraught with inconvenience and potential peril. For many, the nearest source was a public standpipe, where crowds would gather, often before dawn, to fill buckets and pitchers. The water itself, drawn from the Thames or local wells, was frequently contaminated with sewage and industrial waste, a fact known but largely unavoidable. The concept of readily available piped water in every home was a luxury enjoyed by only the wealthiest. For the majority, water had to be carried, often considerable distances, making frequent washing a physically demanding undertaking. Public bathhouses existed, but they were often perceived as scandalous places, associated with questionable morals and the mingling of social classes. For women in particular, Visiting a public bathhouse was often considered a bold and somewhat unseemly act. Private bathing, as mentioned earlier, was an infrequent ritual. Water had to be heated over a fire, a time-consuming and laborious process. Bathwater was often shared among family members, proceeding in order of age and perceived cleanliness. By the time the last bather entered the tub, the water was likely tepid and murky, a testament to the collective grime of the household. Public toilets, or water closets, were still relatively new and unevenly distributed. Many relied on more rudimentary facilities, the cleanliness and accessibility of which varied greatly, depending on one's social standing and location. The less affluent often had to make do with shared privies that were frequently overflowing and unsanitary. The tap water that did find its way into some homes was far from pure. Lead pipes, a common plumbing material, leached the toxic metal into the water supply, contributing to a range of health problems. Cholera outbreaks were a recurring nightmare, spread through contaminated water and claiming thousands of lives in devastating epidemics. Typhoid fever and other waterborne illnesses were also rampant. Perhaps most unsettling was the faint, almost ethereal glow that some claimed to have observed in their drinking water, a subtle luminescence that hinted at the unseen microbial life thriving within. It was a ghostly testament to the inadequacies of Victorian sanitation. You might carefully pour a glass of water from a pitcher, holding it up to the dim light. It appears clear enough, but you can't quite shake the nagging suspicion of unseen contaminants. You recall stories of neighbours falling ill, their symptoms mirroring those attributed to tainted water. These struggles with water access and sanitation fostered a strong sense of fatalism regarding health, or perhaps it simply contributed to the tragically high mortality rates. The very liquid that sustained life also carried the seeds of its demise. Should illness strike in Victorian London, you would find yourself at the mercy of a medical system that was often as baffling as the ailments it sought to cure. Understanding of disease was still rudimentary, and diagnoses frequently ranged from the vaguely moralistic to the outright fantastical. Female hysteria, as previously mentioned, was a common diagnosis for a wide array of symptoms in women, often attributed to a wandering uterus or repressed desires. Treatment might involve anything from rest cures and confinement to more invasive procedures. For men, ailments might be attributed to imbalances of the humours, or the more ominous-sounding ghosts in the blood. The prevailing medical theories often drew upon ancient Galenic principles, with little understanding of germ theory, or the role of microorganisms in causing disease. Common treatments were often more dangerous than the illnesses they were intended to address. Mercury, a highly toxic substance, was a popular remedy for a variety of ailments, leading to mercury poisoning and a host of debilitating symptoms. Leeches were widely used for bloodletting, a practice based on the flawed notion that removing bad blood could cure disease. Laudanum, an opium-based tincture, was freely prescribed for pain, anxiety, and even children's ailments, leading to widespread addiction. Surgery was a terrifying prospect, performed without the benefit of proper anaesthesia or antiseptic practices for much of the era. Operations were rushed and brutal, with patients often succumbing to shock or infection. Surgeons relied on speed and brute force, their success often attributed to little more than luck and the patient's will to survive. Amputations were common, performed with saws and, it seemed, a spiritual equivalent of crossed fingers. Hospitals, while charitable in their intent, were often overcrowded and unsanitary, serving as breeding grounds for infection. Visiting a hospital was often seen as a last resort, a place where one went to die rather than to recover. The rise of quackery flourished in this environment of medical uncertainty. Purveyors of patent medicines promised miracle cures for all manner of ailments, their concoctions often containing dubious and sometimes dangerous ingredients. Desperate individuals seeking relief from their suffering often fell prey to these charlatans. You might find yourself facing a persistent cough or a debilitating fever, weighing the risks of seeking medical help against the likelihood of being subjected to ineffective or harmful treatments. You listen to the whispered advice of neighbours and family members, their remedies ranging from herbal concoctions to superstitious rituals. The limitations of Victorian medicine fostered a strong reliance on faith and home remedies, or perhaps it simply contributed to the tragically short lifespans. The sick were often left to the mercy of fate, with little hope of effective intervention. As evening descends, often accompanied by a fresh wave of drizzle, the prospect of dinner offers little in the way of culinary delight for the average Victorian Londoner. Meals were typically utilitarian affairs, designed to provide sustenance rather than pleasure. Boiled beef was a staple, often cooked for hours until it achieved a greyish, stringy consistency and a flavour that could charitably be described as bland. Suspicious pies, filled with unidentifiable meats and vegetables, were another common offering, their crust often tough and their contents a mystery. For those living near the river, jelly deals were considered a delicacy, a wobbly, gelatinous concoction that is unlikely to appeal to modern palates. Vegetables, when available, were usually boiled to within an inch of their nutritional life, rendering them pale and tasteless. Potatoes were a frequent accompaniment, often served mashed and watery. Condiments were scarce, and flavouring typically consisted of little more than salt and perhaps a dash of weak mustard. Dessert, if it appeared at all, was often a simple affair, perhaps a watery custard or a fruit crumble made with whatever seasonal produce was available and affordable. Jellies, often brightly coloured and possessing a disconcerting jiggle, were also popular. Their flavour derived more from artificial colourings and flavourings than actual fruit. The dining experience itself was often communal and somewhat chaotic. Families would gather around a small table, often with barely enough space for everyone to sit comfortably. Etiquette varied depending on social class, but for the working classes the focus was on consuming food quickly and efficiently. One fork might be shared between several family members, and conversation was often sparse. The quality of food was understandably a constant concern. Adulteration was rife, with unscrupulous vendors adding all manner of questionable substances to food and drink to increase volume or improve appearance. Chalk might be added to milk, sand to sugar, and dangerous dyes to sweets. The lack of effective food safety regulations meant that consumers were largely at the mercy of dishonest traders. You might find yourself seated at a crowded table, the dim light of a single gas lamp casting long shadows on the walls. The aroma of boiled beef fills the air, mingling with the dampness from your still wet clothing. You eye the suspicious-looking pie with a mixture of hunger and apprehension. These uninspired meals fostered a certain appreciation for simple sustenance, or perhaps it simply contributed to the general air of dissatisfaction. Culinary justice, it seemed, was a concept yet to be fully realised in Victorian London. The moral and social fabric of Victorian London was tightly woven with the threads of religion, predominantly a stern and unforgiving brand of Christianity. Sunday service was not merely a suggestion but an expectation, a public demonstration of one's piety and respectability. Failure to attend could result in social ostracisation and the whispered judgment of neighbours. The pulpit served as a powerful platform, delivering sermons that often emphasised the dangers of sin and the importance of adhering to strict moral codes. the concept of damnation loomed large, and the fear of eternal punishment was a potent tool for social control. Every minor transgression, every fleeting impure thought, could be meticulously tallied in the ledger of one's soul. Sin was a pervasive preoccupation, with particular attention paid to matters of sexuality and personal conduct. Public displays of affection were frowned upon, and even within marriage, intimacy was often viewed with a degree of suspicion and discussed in hushed tones. The rigid social hierarchies were seen as divinely ordained, and any deviation from one's assigned place was considered a challenge to the natural order. The local priest or clergyman held considerable sway in the community, acting not only as a spiritual guide but also as a moral arbiter and often a source of charitable aid. His pronouncements carried weight, shaping public opinion and reinforcing the prevailing social norms. Beneath the veneer of religious piety, however, lay a current of repression and hypocrisy. The rigid moral code often masked underlying desires and frustrations, leading to a culture of hidden vices and unspoken anxieties. The pressure to conform could be immense, leading to emotional and psychological strain. The emphasis on outward respectability often meant that genuine compassion and empathy were in short supply. Those who fell outside the strict moral boundaries, the unmarried mothers, the unemployed, the visibly different, were often treated with scorn and relegated to the fringes of society. You might find yourself preparing for Sunday service, ensuring that your attire is suitably sombre and your demeanour appropriately pious. You reflect on the week's minor indiscretions, hoping they will not be visible on your countenance. You observe the faces of your neighbours as they make their way to church, a mixture of dutiful resignation and perhaps a flicker of genuine faith in their eyes. Religion provided a much-needed framework of meaning and morality in a challenging and uncertain world, or perhaps it simply served to reinforce social inequalities and stifle individual expression. The priest, it often seemed, had never truly smiled, and the collective weight of unspoken sins hung heavy in the air. The lives of women in Victorian London were largely defined by their gender, with societal expectations and legal limitations confining them to a narrow sphere of influence. They were denied the right to vote, had limited access to education and professions, and were largely considered the property of their husbands or fathers. For poor women, life was a relentless cycle of domestic drudgery. They toiled in their own cramped homes, caring for children, cooking meagre meals, and struggling to keep their families clothed and clean in the face of overwhelming poverty. Many also worked outside the home as charwomen, laundry maids, or street vendors, their labour often essential to their family's survival, but poorly paid and undervalued. Married women had few legal rights. They could not own property in their own name, and their earnings belonged to their husbands. Divorce was difficult and socially scandalous, leaving many trapped in unhappy or even abusive marriages. The ideal of the angel in the house, the pious, submissive wife and mother, placed immense pressure on women to conform to unrealistic standards of domesticity and self-sacrifice. Even for wealthier women, life was not without its constraints. While they might not engage in manual labour, they were expected to manage the household, oversee servants, and cultivate ladylike accomplishments such as music, drawing, and needlework. Their primary purpose was to be a decorative and socially advantageous wife and mother. Intellectual pursuits were often discouraged, as it was feared they might make women unfeminine or challenge the prevailing social order. The pressure to marry and produce heirs was immense. Unmarried women, particularly those past a certain age, were often viewed with pity or suspicion, relegated to the status of spinsters With limited social standing and uncertain futures, the corset, a seemingly innocuous garment, served as a potent symbol of the physical and societal constraints placed upon women. It restricted breathing and movement, reinforcing the ideal of the delicate and passive female form. You might observe the women around you, the weary faces of working mothers, the constrained smiles of middle-class wives, the resigned expressions of unmarried daughters. You feel the subtle, yet pervasive weight of expectation, a silent hand guiding your every step. These limitations fostered a strong sense of female solidarity and resilience within the domestic sphere, or perhaps it simply resulted in widespread frustration and a stifling of potential. The work of women, whether visible or invisible, was endless and often thankless. Beyond the confines of the home and the workplace, the streets of Victorian London could be a dangerous and unpredictable realm. As darkness fell, particularly in the poorer districts, the threat of street violence loomed large. Pickpockets were a constant menace, their nimble fingers adept at relieving unwary pedestrians of their purses and valuables. Drunken brawls were a common sight outside public houses, fueled by cheap gin and simmering frustrations. Rival gangs clashed in shadowy alleyways. Their disputes often settled with fists and knives. The most infamous manifestation of Victorian street violence was, of course, the reign of terror inflicted by Jack the Ripper in the late 1880s. While this occurred slightly later than our chosen year of 1855, the underlying social conditions that allowed such horrors to occur were already present. Poverty, overcrowding, and a stark divide between the affluent West End and the impoverished East End. The fear and fascination surrounding such crimes gripped the city, exposing the dark underbelly of Victorian society. Law enforcement, in the form of the Bobbies, named after Sir Robert Peel, who established the Metropolitan Police, patrolled the streets, but their numbers were often insufficient to maintain order in the sprawling metropolis. Their effectiveness was sometimes hampered by corruption and a tendency to focus their attention on petty offences rather than addressing the root causes of crime. Public spectacles, both gruesome and celebratory, were a common feature of Victorian life. Executions, although gradually moved behind prison walls during this period, had previously been public events, drawing large crowds eager to witness the ultimate punishment. These occasions served as a stark reminder of the power of the state and the consequences of transgressing the law. Less morbid public entertainments, such as street performers, parades, and political rallies, also drew large gatherings, providing moments of diversion and excitement in the otherwise often monotonous lives of Londoners. However, these crowds could also become unruly, and the potential for disorder was ever present. You might find yourself hurrying through a dimly lit street after dusk, clutching your meagre belongings tightly. You hear the sounds of raised voices and hurried footsteps in the distance, and a shiver of unease runs down your spine. You recall the cautionary tales of those who have fallen victim to the dangers of the night. These outbreaks of violence were simply a reflection of the harsh realities of poverty and inequality, or perhaps they revealed a deeper societal tension simmering beneath the surface of Victorian respectability. The cobblestones hummed a weary tune beneath your hurried steps, and the streets, it seemed, could be as unforgiving as the weather. Death was an omnipresent reality in Victorian London, a frequent visitor to households of all social classes. Life expectancy was considerably lower than today, hovering around 40 years for the average Londoner, and even less for those in the poorest districts. Infant and child mortality rates were tragically high. Diseases such as cholera, typhoid, diphtheria, and tuberculosis swept through the city in deadly epidemics, claiming the lives of countless young children. A cough or a fever that would be easily treatable today could quickly prove fatal. Death rituals played a significant role in Victorian society. Mourning attire was elaborate and strictly prescribed, with widows expected to wear black for extended periods. Séance parties, aimed at contacting the spirits of the deceased, were a popular form of entertainment and a way of coping with loss. Hair jewellery, crafted from the tresses of the departed, served as macabre yet sentimental mementos. The sheer frequency of death led to a certain degree of denial and euphemism. The deceased were often referred to as having passed away or gone to their eternal rest. Elaborate funeral customs and ornate tombstones served as a way of commemorating the dead, and perhaps also of distancing the living from the harsh reality of mortality. The graveyards of London were overflowing, leading to concerns about public health and the unsettling practice of exhuming bodies to make space for new burials. The smell of decay often permeated the air around these overcrowded final resting places. If you were fortunate enough to afford it, your coffin might be lined with velvet and adorned with intricate carvings. If not, you might find yourself in a simple wooden box, perhaps even sharing your final resting place with another soul. You might hear news of another neighbour succumbing to illness, the mournful tolling of church bells a frequent reminder of the city's mortality. You reflect on the brevity and fragility of life in this era, the constant shadow of death that hangs over every day. These elaborate rituals and euphemisms were a way of coping with the overwhelming presence of death, or perhaps they were a form of societal denial, a refusal to fully confront the harsh realities of disease and mortality. Death, in Victorian London, was both intimately familiar and fiercely resisted, a quiet resignation that settled over the city like the morning mist. And so, dear listener, you have endured a day in the life of a Victorian Londoner. You have navigated the fog, the filth, and the ever-present drizzle. You have subsisted on barely edible fare, battled questionable hygiene, and confronted the constant threat of illness and social disapproval. You have witnessed the stark realities of labour, the miseries of inadequate housing, and the often grim public spectacle. You felt the pervasive dampness knitting itself into your bones, heard the city's tired murmur, and perhaps even glimpsed the strange patterns in the ice on a window pane. This journey into the past, while perhaps uncomfortable, serves not to frighten, but to remind us of the resilience of the human spirit. It is a testament to how life, in all its forms, finds a way to endure, to adapt, to find small moments of warmth even in the chill. Now, as the phantom smells of coal smoke and damp earth begin to fade, and the distant echoes of horse-drawn carriages soften into silence, allow yourself to drift back to the comfort of your own time and space. Your journey through Victorian London is complete. Time, like a velvet curtain, draws closed on the coal-streaked century you've just wandered through, and then a new scent rises. It's older, warmer, ash and olive oil, cypress bark and something else, something ancient and electric, humming quietly beneath the soil. The ground shifts gently underfoot, from cobblestone to crushed marble dust, as the quiet pulse of another city begins to stir beneath the stars. You're not alone. There is a dog beside you, and in your hand the cool weight of a scroll. Welcome to Rome. Not the Rome of emperors and colosseums, but the quieter one, tucked between courtyards and conversations shadowed in twilight. Let us walk a while. You are Pliny the Younger, not a general, not an emperor, not a gladiator. You are a man of letters, of law, of careful cultivation, a man who saw too much, said too little, and wrote everything down anyway. You moved through the gilded halls of power, whispered in the ears of emperors, and dined with those whose names would become legend or infamy. But unlike the heroes and villains of epic poems, your battles were fought not with swords, but with words. Not on open fields, but in hushed antechambers and over ink-stained scrolls. Your armour was your reputation, your shield, your carefully constructed calm. Yet, as the shadows lengthen and the oil lamp flickers, casting long dancing figures on the frescoed walls of your villa, the quiet dread remains. It clings to you like the fine dust of Vesuvius that settled on everything, even years after its fury. You remember the faces of those who vanished, the names of those who were forgotten, the chilling silence that followed a perfectly placed word or a poorly chosen one. You cultivated tranquility, yes, but in a world where a whisper could bring down an empire, and a sneeze at the wrong moment could end a life. True calm was a luxury few, even the very wealthy could truly afford. And you, dear reader, were not one of them. You were Pliny, and tonight we remember with you. You are born into this world with a name that means something. A family tree with roots that stretch back through centuries of Roman soil, Gaius Plinius Caecilius Secundus. A mouthful, certainly, and a legacy even more so. Your earliest memories are not of hunger or want, but of the cool touch of marble underfoot, the murmur of slaves, the scent of expensive incense. You are a child of wealth, of privilege, of the gilded cage that is the Roman elite. Your home, a sprawling villa near the shores of Lake Como, is a sanctuary of sorts, an oasis of carefully curated beauty. But even here, far from the chaotic pulse of Rome, the hum of the empire's machinations is a constant low thrum beneath the surface. You learn early that while money can buy comfort, it offers no true immunity from the caprice of power or the indifference of nature. Your youth, then, is a tapestry woven with threads of classical education and an acute awareness of the precariousness of life. You study Greek and Latin, rhetoric and philosophy. You memorize epic poems, dissect legal arguments, and learn the delicate dance of polite society. You're groomed for greatness, for a life of public service, a life of influence. Your family expects it. You expect it. The world expects it. It is the path laid out for you, as clearly as the mosaic patterns on your villa floors. And then, one August afternoon, everything changes. Not with a shout, but with a shudder. Not with a clang of steel, but with a distant rumble. You are 17 years old, studying perhaps, or enjoying the cool breeze from the sea when the sky begins to darken. A strange, ominous cloud, unlike any you've ever seen, unfurls itself above the Bay of Naples. It's shaped, you'll later write, like a pine tree, vast and terrifying. This is no ordinary storm. This is something ancient, something primal awakening. Your uncle, Pliny the Elder, is not just an uncle, but a titan, a scholar, an admiral, a man of boundless curiosity and relentless industry. He is the author of the Natural History, a monumental work encompassing everything known about the world. He is your mentor, your inspiration, your intellectual North Star, and he is crucially stationed with the fleet at Misenum, directly across the bay from the burgeoning catastrophe. When others flee, he sails towards it. He is a man driven by an insatiable thirst for knowledge, even at the cost of his own safety. You're left behind, a boy watching the sky turn black, the air grow thick with ash and cinders. You see the terrified faces of those who flee, covered in grey dust, their eyes wide with unspoken horror. The ground trembles beneath your feet, the sea churns, and your uncle, your formidable, brilliant uncle, vanishes into the heart of that inferno. He dies on the shores of Stabiae, overcome by the toxic fumes, a casualty of his own magnificent intellect. A hero, yes, but a dead one. His death is not just a personal tragedy, it is a profound turning point. You, a mere youth, are now his heir. Not just to his considerable fortune, but to his legacy, his name, and the immense weight of expectation that comes with it. You inherit his vast library, his notes, his unfinished work. You inherit the burden of remembering him, of honouring his memory in a world that quickly forgets. And you inherit too the chilling lesson that knowledge, even the pursuit of it, can be a deadly endeavour. You are now Pliny the Younger. The younger part is a constant reminder of the shadow you stand in, the giant whose footsteps you are meant to follow. But the world you inhabit is not your uncle's. His was a world of relatively stable emperors, of intellectual exploration. Yours is a world simmering with paranoia, where the line between patron and predator is thin, and where survival often means knowing when to speak, and, more importantly, when to remain silent. You survived the ash, the rumbling earth, the fiery breath of Vesuvius. But that survival, you quickly realize, has merely propelled you into a different kind of danger. One where the threat is not from a volcano, but from the very air you breathe in the halls of power. It's a bit like surviving a shipwreck only to realize you're stranded on an island inhabited by particularly hungry crocodiles. Though of course, the crocodiles wear togas. Your education, even before the ash of Vesuvius settled, was always aimed at one thing: public life. Not the thrilling, glorious public life of a general leading legions, but the infinitely more treacherous one of a Roman statesman. You're trained not to wield a sword, but to wield words, not to conquer foreign lands, but to navigate the labyrinthine politics of Rome, a city where subtle slights could prove deadlier than direct attacks. It's an education designed to make you fit for leadership, but also, crucially, to keep you alive. Your mentors are the best Rome has to offer. Quintilian, the celebrated rhetorician, teaches you the art of persuasion, the intricate dance of argument. He drills into you the importance of decorum, of speaking with grace and propriety. You learn to construct sentences like fortresses, impenetrable and elegant. You learn to speak for hours, if necessary, on subjects both profound and utterly trivial, all while maintaining an air of impeccable erudition. This isn't about truth, not always. It's about convincing. It's about appearing wise, even when you're utterly bewildered. It's about creating an impression of calm competence, even when your stomach is churning with dread. You master the legal system, memorizing the intricacies of Roman law, the endless precedents, the precise formulations. You learn to argue cases, to defend the accused, to prosecute the guilty, or rather, to argue for whoever your patron or the prevailing winds of power dictate. Justice, you discover, is often less about absolute truth and more about who has the more persuasive advocate, the deeper pockets, or, most importantly, the right connections. You learn to frame arguments, to anticipate objections, to subtly undermine your opponent without appearing overtly hostile. It's a bit like a polite, deadly chess game played with words instead of pieces, and the board is always tilted. But the most important lesson you learn, the one that truly prepares you for the treacherous currents of Roman life, is not found in any textbook. It is learned in the quiet moments between lectures, in the hushed whispers of the forum, in the nervous glances exchanged at dinner parties. You learn the art of silence. You learn to speak without saying anything dangerous. You learn to praise without appearing sycophantic. You learn to criticize with such careful nuance that the target isn't entirely sure if they've been insulted or complimented. You learn to navigate conversations like a ship through a minefield, detecting the slightest tremor of disapproval, the faintest hint of suspicion. Under emperors like Domitian, this skill isn't just useful, it's essential for survival. Domitian, a man famously paranoid, saw conspiracies everywhere. A misplaced word, an ill-timed joke, a perceived slight. Any of these could send you to exile, or worse. Poets were banished. Philosophers were executed. Men of letters like yourself lived with a constant quiet tremor of fear. So you learned to craft your speeches, your letters, your every utterance with surgical precision. You become a master of the double entendre, the veiled reference, the strategic omission. You become an artist of the unsaid. Consider the simple act of writing a letter. For you, it's not merely communication, it's a performance. Every phrase is weighed, every adjective scrutinized. Is this too bold? Does this sound presumptuous? Will this be misinterpreted by hostile eyes, or worse, by the emperor himself? You learn to write letters that convey sincerity without true vulnerability, that offer support without committing too much, that express loyalty without seeming desperate. It's a delicate dance, always, and it's not just about what you say, but how you present yourself. Your bearing, your expressions, the very way you hold your scroll, all are part of the performance. You learn to project an air of calm authority, even when your heart is hammering. You learn to smile politely at those you distrust, to nod sagely at pronouncements you find ridiculous. You are, in essence, an actor on the grandest stage of all, with your life and the lives of those you care about as the stakes. It's an exhausting performance, day in and day out. It makes you wonder, sometimes, if you've forgotten who you truly are, buried beneath layers of carefully constructed composure. But then, who has the luxury of being truly themselves in a world like this? Not you, Pliny, not in Rome. Your days are a finely choreographed ballet of obligations, social rituals and calculated interactions. The Roman dawn, heralded by the crow of a rooster or the distant rumble of carts on the cobblestones, does not bring a sense of fresh beginnings, but rather a renewed awareness of the intricate web you must navigate. You rise early, before the oppressive heat of midday settles, and your household springs to life around you with a practiced efficiency. Slaves move silently, preparing your morning meal, laying out your meticulously folded toga, heating water for your bath. You, however, are rarely silent. Your mind is already racing, rehearsing the day's encounters, anticipating potential pitfalls. Your mornings are often devoted to the salutatio, the ritual morning call. Clients and less fortunate acquaintances arrive at your house, seeking your patronage, your legal counsel, or simply your influence. You greet them, dispense advice, listen to their petitions. You maintain an air of benevolent authority, a carefully constructed facade of accessibility. Each interaction is a calculation. Who truly needs your help? Who is merely trying to extract a favour? Who might be a spy for a rival, or worse, for the emperor's watchful eye? You offer polite platitudes, non-committal promises, and sometimes, if the person seems trustworthy and their plight genuine actual assistance. It's a delicate balance, appearing generous without appearing reckless. After these morning rituals, your day unfolds into a series of public appearances. You might attend the forum, where legal cases are argued and public pronouncements made. You might sit on a judicial panel, listening to complex disputes, weighing evidence, and delivering pronouncements that could profoundly impact lives. Each word you speak, each judgment you render, is scrutinized. You're aware of the eyes on you, the whispers that follow your every move. A wrong decision, a perceived bias, could easily become a weapon wielded against you. The air in the forum is thick with the scent of dust, sweat, and ambition, and sometimes fear. Then there are the social engagements. Dinners at the villas of other prominent Romans are not merely occasions for convivial feasting, they are extensions of the political arena. The food is exquisite, the wine flows freely, but the conversation is a minefield. You learn to listen more than you speak, to observe the subtle shifts in alliances, the unspoken tensions between guests. A seemingly innocent jest can carry a hidden barb. A casual remark about the emperor can be reported, distorted, and used against you. You perfect the art of polite evasion, of steering conversations away from dangerous topics. You praise the food, admire the decor, discuss the latest gladiatorial games, anything to avoid a political misstep. It's exhausting, this constant vigilance. You eat and drink, but you never truly relax. It's a bit like trying to enjoy a lavish banquet while knowing there's a viper coiled under your chair. A very well-fed viper, perhaps, but a viper nonetheless. Your houses, both in Rome and in your various country estates, are filled with the trappings of your wealth and status. Libraries overflowing with scrolls, the scent of aged papyrus and beeswax heavy in the air. Marble statues gleam in the courtyards, reflecting the filtered sunlight. Frescoes adorn the walls, depicting mythological scenes or serene landscapes. These are spaces of beauty, of intellectual pursuit, of carefully cultivated peace. Yet, even within these luxurious confines, the quiet panic is a constant companion. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside your window can trigger a flicker of apprehension. Is that a slave moving about or something more sinister? You sleep, yes, in a bed of soft linens, under a silken blanket, perhaps with the gentle sound of a distant fountain outside your window. But you never truly sleep at peace. The anxieties of the day, the unresolved tensions, the ever-present threat of a sudden summons or an unexpected visitor chase you into the night. You rehearse future conversations, re-examine past ones, searching for any overlooked detail, any potential misstep. The political landscape of Rome is a swamp, and even the highest branches offer little solid ground. You're always aware of how easily you could fall, how quickly you could disappear. The luxury of your surroundings only serves to highlight the fragility of your position. The marble is cold, the statues are silent, and the books, while offering temporary escape, are ultimately no shield against the precarious reality of your existence. You live in a golden cage, Pliny, and the bars are made of fear. Forget the grand narratives, forget the epic poems and the heroic statues. You wear no gleaming armour, wield no fearsome sword. There are no togas of destiny, no capes that billow dramatically in the wind. Your gear is far more subtle and far more deadly in its own way. Your weapons are not forged in a smithy, but honed in the crucible of Roman society. Scrolls, ink, and flattery. Your scrolls are your ammunition, not the weighty tomes of history, but the blank sheets of papyrus, ready to receive your carefully constructed words. These are the canvases upon which you paint your petitions, your legal arguments, your letters to emperors and friends. Each word, each turn of phrase is a brushstroke. A misplaced comma could be a career ender. A poorly chosen adjective could be a death warrant. You spend hours, sometimes days, perfecting a single letter, ensuring it conveys precisely the right tone, deference without servility, confidence without arrogance, wit without insolence. The dry rustle of papyrus as you unroll a new sheet is the sound of possibility, but also of immense risk. Your ink is the blood of your craft, not the dark, viscous blood of battle, but the rich, flowing black that spills from your pen, giving life to your thoughts. It stains your fingers, a constant reminder of your chosen path. This ink carries your carefully crafted thoughts, your calculated opinions, your subtle pleas for leniency or justice. It is the conduit for your influence, the silent messenger that carries your carefully constructed persona to the highest echelons of power. It's the medium through which you build your reputation, defend your clients, and subtly influence the course of events. And just as easily, it can be the medium through which your downfall is orchestrated. And then there is flattery. This is perhaps your most potent and most insidious weapon. Not the crude, obvious kind that marks a sycophant, but the refined, almost imperceptible form that weaves itself into the fabric of conversation, letters, and public addresses. You learn to praise without appearing to praise, to elevate without demeaning yourself. You discern the specific vanities of those in power and cater to them with surgical precision. You admire an emperor's wisdom, his military prowess, his artistic taste, even if privately you harbour profound doubts. This isn't about genuine admiration, it's about survival. It's about disarming suspicion, creating a sense of ease, and subtly aligning yourself with those who hold your fate in their hands. It's a performance of unwavering loyalty, even when your inner monologue is screaming otherwise. There is no toga of destiny for you, Pliny. You wear a toga certainly, but it's a garment of performance, not power. It's clean, yes, meticulously draped, signalling your status and adherence to tradition. But on the inside, metaphorically speaking, it is unravelling at the seams. Your safety is not a tangible thing, a shield you can carry. It is a fragile illusion, constructed daily through careful diplomacy, relentless self-censorship, and an acute understanding of the unpredictable whims of those above you. You might walk through the forum, head held high, appearing utterly secure. But beneath that calm exterior, you're acutely aware of the precariousness of your position, the constant threat of a whisper, a rumour, a sudden shift in political favour. The myths tell of Roman heroes facing down barbarians, wielding gladius and shield. Your reality is far less dramatic and far more insidious. Your battles are fought in hushed courtrooms, over parchment, and across dinner tables where the wine might be poisoned by more than just alcohol. The enemy is not a foreign foe, but the quiet paranoia of an emperor, the envy of a rival, the unpredictable tide of public opinion. You carry no visible wounds from these battles, no scars of combat, but the constant vigilance, the suppression of your true thoughts, the endless self-editing. These are the subtle injuries that accumulate, leaving you feeling perpetually exhausted, perpetually on edge. You wear safety like a finely woven tunic, clean and elegant on the outside, but inside, where no one can see, the threads are fraying, the stitches are coming undone. It's a very Roman kind of safety, performative, precarious, and utterly exhausting to maintain, and you, Pliny, maintain it with a quiet, persistent dread. Your greatest battlefields were not the dusty plains of Germania or the sun-baked deserts of the East. Your arenas were the courts of law, the hallowed halls of the Senate, and later the vast crumbling provinces of the Empire. When you are made governor of Bithynia Pontus, a sprawling and fractious province in what is now modern-day Turkey, you are not given a legion of soldiers. You're given a staff of clerks, a mandate to restore order, and an unending stream of problems. Your weapon, as always, is your meticulous mind, your ability to articulate, and your unwavering commitment to the Roman way of doing things, even when that way seems to be a slow, elegant descent into bureaucratic paralysis. Your duties as governor are immense, mundane, and often absurd. You are tasked with everything from repairing crumbling aqueducts to investigating local cults. You arbitrate disputes between squabbling cities, manage public funds, and ensure the smooth collection of taxes. Every decision you make, every directive you issue, must be carefully considered, meticulously documented, and crucially communicated to the emperor himself. This is where the true battle lies, in your correspondence with the Emperor Trajan. Your letters are not casual exchanges of pleasantries. They are official reports, requests for guidance, detailed accounts of your actions. Every word you send must be perfect. Every sentence must be clear, unambiguous, and demonstrably loyal. You frame questions in such a way that the emperor's response will, ideally, absolve you of future blame. You report problems with a carefully calibrated tone, neither too alarmist nor too dismissive. It's a dance of deference and subtle manipulation, all conducted through the medium of ink and parchment, across thousands of miles. Consider the dilemma of the Christians. They are a new, unsettling presence in your province, refusing to worship the state gods, clinging to their strange monotheistic beliefs. What do you do with them? The law is unclear. The existing precedents are contradictory. You are a man of order, a devotee of Roman tradition, and these people are causing unrest, disrupting the established religious order. Do you prosecute them? Do you ignore them? Do you offer them a chance to recant? You write to Trajan, laying out the problem with characteristic thoroughness. You describe the accusations, the interrogations, the various responses you've encountered. You explain your methods, offering accused Christians 3 chances to recant, executing those who refuse, releasing those who worship the Roman gods. You even mention the anonymous accusations and how you wisely discarded them. You are, in essence, asking for his blessing, or at least his confirmation of your pragmatic, if somewhat brutal, approach. And Trajan, wise and experienced, sends back a concise, almost bland reply, essentially confirming your actions while cautioning against witch hunts based on anonymous denunciations. He's telling you, in effect, to keep things quiet, keep things orderly, and don't make a bigger problem out of it than it needs to be. This is the quiet negotiation of power. Every silence is calculated. When to hold back information, when to request explicit instructions to avoid responsibility. You learn to manage a crumbling province with elegant grammar, to address a complex financial crisis with perfectly balanced clauses. The very act of writing becomes a strategic maneuver. Your letters are not just reports. They are subtle arguments, preemptive defences, carefully constructed appeals. You're not leading armies against barbarians, but you're managing a constant insurgency of decay, inefficiency, and human stubbornness. You're fighting against the slow entropy of a vast empire, armed only with your meticulous administrative skills and your ability to craft a compelling and politically safe dispatch. You are the embodiment of Roman bureaucracy, outwardly imposing, inwardly teetering on the brink of overwhelmed exhaustion, and the emperor far away in Rome relies on your carefully curated version of events to maintain his illusion of control. It's a bit like trying to bail out a leaky boat with the teacup, while simultaneously sending detailed reports to the shipwright explaining why the boat isn't actually sinking, and of course, making sure your teacup is exquisitely crafted. You return from Bithynia Pontus not to a triumphant parade, but to the quiet dignity of your Roman villa. You're praised, yes, for your efficient administration, for your careful handling of the province's myriad problems, for your impeccable correspondence with the Emperor Trajan. You're respected for your legal acumen, your oratorical skill, your unwavering adherence to Roman principles. You're a success by all conventional measures. You've climbed the cursus honorum, achieved senatorial rank, and secured your place among the elite. But are you remembered? Barely. Not in the way a general is remembered for a decisive victory, or an emperor for a lasting peace. Your legacy is not one of grand monuments or sweeping reforms. It is one of meticulously preserved letters, of carefully argued legal cases, of a life lived in the shadow of giants, both historical and political. Your impact was subtle, incremental, often invisible to the casual observer. You were a steady hand, a calming voice, in a world prone to chaotic upheaval, and in a society that valued bold action and dramatic gestures, your quiet competence often blended into the background. You die quietly, likely around 113 AD, a man of some 60-odd years. No dramatic demise, no tragic betrayal, just the slow, inevitable fading that awaits us all. Your end is as understated as much of your life, and as the years turn into decades, and then centuries, your name, while preserved in your own writings, becomes more of a footnote than a chapter in the grand narrative of Rome. And your friends, those with whom you shared intellectual pursuits, anxious whispers, and quiet dinners, many are exiled, their reputations tarnished by association with a fallen emperor, or simply forgotten as new powers rise and new loyalties are demanded. Others vanish without a trace, victims of the ever-present political currents that could sweep away even the most careful of individuals. The ones who survive do so by adapting, by shifting their allegiances, by forgetting inconvenient truths. The friendships you cultivated, so carefully nurtured through letters and shared anxieties, often prove as fragile as the parchment they were written on. You tried to hold back the tide, didn't you, Pliny? The tide of corruption, of arbitrary power, of moral decay. You tried to stem the flow with your meticulously crafted letters, your eloquent arguments, your appeals to reason and justice. You believed in the power of words, the efficacy of law, the enduring strength of Roman ideals, and for a time, perhaps, your efforts made a difference. You smoothed over some rough edges, mitigated some injustices, maintained a semblance of order, but ultimately paper sinks. The very tools you relied upon, the scrolls, the ink, the carefully chosen phrases, are not enough to halt the slow, inexorable decline of an empire. You were a man of the written word in a world increasingly defined by unwritten rules, by the raw exercise of power. You sought to impose order through elegant grammar, to ensure justice through logical argumentation, to secure your place through careful diplomacy. And while you achieved a measure of success, you also bore witness to the fragility of it all. The calm you cultivated, the stability you sought to embody, was often just a thin veneer over a simmering cauldron of ambition, fear, and brutality. Your letters, collected and preserved, are a testament to your life, your anxieties, your intellectual curiosity. They are a window into the mind of an elite Roman trying desperately to remain sane and safe in an insane and dangerous world. But they also reveal the limits of your power, the ultimate futility of trying to control the uncontrollable with nothing more than elegant prose. You wrote about a world that was constantly shifting beneath your feet, a world where even the most accomplished individual could be erased in an instant. And in the end, that is perhaps your most profound legacy. The quiet, chilling honesty with which you documented the precariousness of existence, even for those who seem to have everything. The echoes of your life are not of thunderous victories, but of the soft rustle of parchment and the quiet dread that accompanied every careful word. 7. Outro. Reflective wind-down. You never led armies to glorious conquest. You never rebuilt shattered cities from their ashes. Your hands, though stained with ink, never knew the rough feel of a general's sword hilt or the weight of an emperor's sceptre. You were not a man of grand, sweeping gestures. Instead, you remembered. You remembered the ash in the sky, the distant rumble that foretold a world utterly changed. You remembered the faces of the lost, the names of the disappeared. You remembered the chill of imperial paranoia, the subtle threats that hung in the air like an unseen miasma. You remembered the precise words that could save a life, and the careless ones that could end it. You noticed. You noticed the quiet currents of power, the unspoken alliances, the subtle shifts in the political winds. You noticed the way fear could ripple through a room, the way ambition could twist a face, the way silence could speak volumes. You saw the intricate dance of flattery and suspicion, of loyalty and betrayal, played out on the grand stage of Rome. You saw the fragility beneath the marble, the vulnerability behind the toga. And you wrote everything down anyway. The meticulous reports, the thoughtful legal arguments, the personal letters to friends and family, the carefully crafted dispatches to the most powerful man in the world. You transcribed the anxieties of your age, the nuances of your decisions, the observations of your keen, watchful mind. You filled countless scrolls, your fingers aching, your lamp burning low into the night. You left behind a record, not of heroics, but of endurance, not of conquest, but of survival through intellect and careful navigation. And somehow, in the quiet, unassuming way you lived, in the meticulous detail of your observations, in the unflinching honesty of your chronicling, that was enough. It was enough to bear witness, enough to leave a trace, enough to remind us 2 millennia later that even in an age of emperors and gladiators, the quiet struggles of a man trying to live a good life amidst immense pressure can be the most compelling story of all. Now close your eyes and drift. The fire in the hearth has burned down to embers, casting a warm, fading glow. The distant street chatter has finally died away. Somewhere a wax tablet is cooling, a message carefully pressed into its surface. Somewhere, in the quiet chambers of history, your name still echoes, a testament to a life lived not with brute force, but with quiet dread, profound intelligence, and the enduring power of the written word. But before sleep fully takes you, another world begins to stir. Gone is the elegance of scrolls and civic ritual. In its place, stone, cold and unyielding beneath your feet. You shuffle forward, the rough wool of your new habit itching where it touches your neck. The great oak doors creak shut behind you, swallowing the last vestiges of the world you knew. No last glance back, of course. That would be unbecoming, unholy even. You stand in the antechamber, the chill of the stone seeping through your thin sandals, and a faint musty odour, old parchment, beeswax and unwashed bodies, tickles your nose. This isn't the picturesque image you might hold in your mind, the one of jovial, rosy-cheeked friars brewing ale and tending gardens, while birds chirp idyllically in the background. Forget the kindly, wise abbots, the sun-dappled cloisters filled with scholarly pursuits, and the general air of serene contemplation you've seen in the stained glass windows, perhaps. No, This is something else entirely. This is less a spiritual retreat and more a spiritual boot camp, run with the efficiency of a well-oiled, deeply pious machine, and dictated by the tyrannical demands of a very large, very loud bell tower. You're about to discover that medieval monastic life is not merely a choice. It's an all-encompassing, mind-numbingly repetitive and profoundly uncomfortable existence. It is exhausting in a way you didn't know possible, holy in a way that feels utterly alien, itchy beyond belief, and perpetually bone-deep cold. And you, my friend, have just signed up for it. Or more likely, someone else signed you up. Welcome to the quiet life. Hope you brought your own existential dread. You're here now, standing on cold stone, the echo of the closing door still vibrating in the air around you. But how did you get here? You certainly didn't grow up dreaming of Gregorian chants and the subtle art of not speaking for days on end. No child ever declared with wide-eyed sincerity, "When I grow up, I want to wear scratchy wool and only eat watery gruel." The path to the monastery was rarely a direct, idyllic sprint towards spiritual enlightenment. More often, it was a winding, often desperate shuffle away from something else entirely. Perhaps it was family politics. Your family, minor nobility on the wrong side of a feud, needed to consolidate power, or perhaps simply to reduce the number of mouths at the dinner table. Sending a younger son or an inconvenient daughter, though female monastic life was a whole different flavour of bleak, to the monastery or convent was an excellent way to secure spiritual merit, dispose of surplus heirs, and avoid messy inheritance disputes. You, the third son, had no real prospects, no land to inherit, no advantageous marriage to be made. Your choices were grim: soldier, vagrant, or monk. And so, here you are, a living, breathing testament to medieval fiscal responsibility. It's like being sent to a very exclusive, very silent boarding school, except you never graduate, and the curriculum is entirely devoted to feeling guilty about being human. Or maybe it was the plague. The Black Death, that charming medieval house guest, swept through your village, your town, your entire world, leaving a trail of devastation and opportunistic rats. Your family, your friends, your neighbours, gone. The world outside became a landscape of fear, death, and social collapse. Where do you go when everything you know has been reduced to ashes and desperation? The church, for all its flaws, offered stability. It offered ritual. It offered a seemingly direct line to a God who, at that moment, seemed rather absent from the daily affairs of man. You didn't seek piety so much as a roof over your head, and a plausible reason not to succumb to utter despair. It's a bit like joining a doomsday cult, but with more Latin and less actual doomsday, for now. Then there's heartbreak. Perhaps your betrothed ran off with a stable boy, or your great love succumbed to a lingering fever, leaving you hollowed out and adrift. The world outside, once vibrant with possibility, now felt like a dull, endless ache. The monastery, with its vows of chastity and its promise of turning inward, seemed a refuge from the sting of earthly love and loss, a place to numb the pain, to transform sorrow into spiritual discipline. It's a very medieval form of emotional evasion, trading the agony of a broken heart for the quiet, predictable agony of a perpetually cold bladder. A fair trade, some might argue. And of course, there were always pure spiritual panic, the sheer, unadulterated terror of eternal damnation. The sermons, vivid and terrifying, painted a picture of hellfire, gnashing of teeth, and unimaginable torments for the unrepentant sinner. You'd seen the depictions in the church murals, devils with pitchforks, sinners boiling in cauldrons, weeping souls cast into darkness, Maybe you committed a sin, a truly grievous one. Or perhaps you just had a naturally anxious disposition coupled with an acute awareness of your own inherent sinfulness. The monastery wasn't just a place to live, it was a penitentiary for your soul, a last-ditch effort to bribe your way into heaven with prayer, suffering, and an absolute lack of personal enjoyment. It's like extreme couponing for your afterlife, where the coupons are self-flagellation and the savings are eternal salvation. So, you stand here not because it was a profound calling whispered by angels, but because it was, quite frankly, the last viable option. A place to survive, to hide, to atone, or simply to exist in a world that offered few comfortable alternatives. You are a refugee of circumstance, a spiritual conscript, about to embark on a life that promises quiet desperation and the faint lingering smell of beeswax. Hope you brought your own coping mechanisms, or at least your own complete lack of expectations. So you've arrived. The great door clangs shut, severing your last tenuous link to the world of butter, laughter, and personal autonomy. Now what? Do you receive a pamphlet, a welcome orientation, a helpful, smiling brother to guide you through the intricacies of monastic life? Number you're not taught so much as absorbed. It's less like formal instruction, and more like being thrown into a very deep, very cold spiritual pool, where the expectation is that you'll simply figure out how to doggy paddle through the divine office. Your first language here, you'll quickly discover, is silence. The world outside was a cacophony of street cries, market haggling, animal noises, and the occasional drunken brawl. Here, the loudest sounds are the shuffling of sandals on stone, the distant clang of a bell, and the surprisingly resonant thud of your own thoughts echoing in the vast, empty spaces of your mind. Speaking is forbidden outside of necessity, and even then, it's done in hushed tones, often through hand gestures or a system of monastic signs that you'll have to pick up through sheer osmosis. Try asking for the salt at dinner, using only your eyebrow and a vague pointing gesture. It's a subtle art. Breaking the silence earns you a stern glance, a public reprimand, or, if you're particularly egregious, the humbling task of scrubbing the latrine pits. Nothing quite says repent like the smell of human waste. You're not given a curriculum, but rather thrust directly into the relentless routine. Your days will soon be dictated by the monastic horarium, a strict schedule governed by the canonical hours, ringing out from the bell tower with an unwavering, almost menacing regularity. You learn to wake before dawn in the frigid pre-light, not because an alarm clock rouses you, but because the first bell for Matins rips through the stillness, demanding your presence. You stumble from your hard pallet, pull on your scratchy habit, and join the procession to the church, your eyes still gritty with sleep. This is not about learning how to pray, but when to pray, and how often to pray, and how long to pray until your knees ache and your mind wanders to the surprisingly vivid memory of a warm loaf of bread. There's the incessant kneeling. You kneel for matins, for lauds, for prime, for terce, for sext, for nun, for vespers, for compline, and for various other impromptu moments of spiritual reflection. Your knees, once fleshy and uncomplaining, will transform into knobby, calloused protuberances, developing a fascinating topography of pain. It's less a devotional act and more a physical endurance test, a bizarre monastic yoga where the only pose is ouch, and the fasting. Oh, the fasting. You'll learn very quickly that butter is a luxury, meat is a rarity, and anything remotely flavourful is probably a sin. Your meals, consumed in stony silence in the refectory, consist of thin gruel, hard bread, and perhaps some watery boiled vegetables. You learn to appreciate the subtle flavour profile of water, and not much else. The lack of proper sustenance combined with the cold and the constant physical demands means you will perpetually feel a low thrum of hunger in your stomach. It's spiritual purification by way of caloric deprivation. Your body becomes a temple, albeit a rather undernourished one. Your training also involves the meticulous repetitive tasks that fill the gaps between prayer. You learn to scrape wax from the flagstones after candlelight services, a futile Sisyphean task given the constant drip. You learn to polish the chalices until they gleam with a dull holiness. You learn to mend your habit with coarse thread and clumsy stitches. You learn to carry water buckets without spilling a single precious drop. These aren't skills for the outside world. They are disciplines designed to humble you, to break your will, to make you utterly dependent on the rhythm of the monastery and the will of the abbot. Every mundane task becomes an exercise in relinquishing self. And then there are the bees. Many monasteries kept bees for their wax, for candles, and their honey for the occasional rare treat or for medicinal purposes. You might find yourself learning the ancient art of beekeeping shrouded in smoke, trying to coax the buzzing creatures into productive harmony, all while silently praying you don't get stung. It's one of the few instances where your training involves something alive and unpredictable, a brief, chaotic interlude in an otherwise meticulously ordered existence. Just try to explain to an angry swarm of bees that you're doing God's work. They tend not to listen. This isn't an education, it's an assimilation. You're not taught, you're absorbed. You're not trained, you are conditioned. You become a cog in a vast ancient machine, slowly shedding your former self, your identity, your very name, in exchange for the anonymity of the cowl and the promise of salvation. And you'll probably forget what butter tastes like, which for some is the real tragedy. The reality of your new life is a symphony of bells, or perhaps more accurately a relentless jarring percussion that dictates every moment of your existence. The monastery doesn't just have a schedule, it is the schedule. Your body clock, once attuned to the rising sun or the demands of a full bladder, is now entirely enslaved to the divine office, a rigid framework of prayer services that punctuate the day and night. Your day begins, often, in the inky blackness before dawn. The first bell for Matins shatters the stillness, an insistent clang that drags you from the shallow, restless sleep of a monk on a straw pallet. You're up, pulling on your scratchy wool habit over your rough tunic, your bare feet meeting the perpetually cold stone floor. There's no dawdling, no hitting the spiritual snooze button. Delay means drawing unwanted attention, and in this life, attention is almost always negative. You shuffle with the other figures, silent shadows in the pre-dawn chill, towards the church. Inside, the darkness is barely broken by the flickering light of a few beeswax candles, their wicks guttering, casting long dancing shadows on the stone walls. The air is thick with the scent of old stone, a dampness, and a faint, lingering aroma of incense from the last service. You stand, you kneel, you chant psalms until your throat is hoarse and your mind numb. The words are in Latin, of course, a sacred tongue that few truly comprehend beyond rote memorization. You drone on, your voice blending with the low, monotonous hum of the other brothers, creating a sound that is both strangely soothing and profoundly hypnotic. It's like a medieval ASMR track, if ASMR was designed to make you question all your life choices. After Matins there's Lauds, often before the sun has even thought about rising. Then a brief, blessed interval for private prayer or, more realistically, a moment to desperately try and warm your hands by the single, communal brazier. Then the bell for prime rings out, signalling the first of the daytime services. The rhythm is relentless. Terce, sext, none, vespers, compline. Each bell, each service, each period of prayer or labour flows seamlessly into the next, a liturgical conveyor belt that transports you through the day. There is no me time, there is only God time, which, in practice, means monastery time. Meals are not a social affair. You eat in the refectory, a long high-ceilinged room in complete silence. The only sound is the drone of a reader, usually a junior monk intoning from a religious text, often something uplifting about the torments of the damned or the virtues of extreme asceticism. Your meal, typically meagre. Think thin gruel, hard bread, maybe some watery vegetables, and almost certainly no meat or dairy unless it's a very special feast day, is consumed quickly with downcast eyes. There's no conversation, no sharing of stories, no complaining about the blandness of the food, unless you enjoy scrubbing floors with your tongue. It's designed to nourish the body just enough to sustain prayer, not to provide pleasure. Eating becomes a functional necessity, stripped of all joy. It's like a very strict, very quiet prison cafeteria, but with more guilt about wanting seconds. Bathing is a rare and often unpleasant affair. There are no luxurious steaming baths. If you're lucky, there's a communal washroom where you might get a bucket of cold water and a rough cloth. Personal hygiene is basic, to say the least. The concept of daily bathing is a distant pagan memory. You will become intimately acquainted with the subtle aroma of unwashed wool, stale sweat, and old incense. It's a very humble fragrance, often described as eau de piété, and sleep, that precious commodity. You sleep on a hard pallet in the dormitory, often in a communal room separated from your brothers by thin partitions or no partitions at all. Your pillow is likely a block of wood or a sack of straw. The air is always cold, even in summer, and the only warmth comes from the inadequate wool blanket. Sleep is not a luxurious escape, but a brief, interrupted period of unconsciousness before the next bell drags you back to consciousness. You dream of soft beds, of warmth, of a world where you don't wake up wondering if your toes have fallen off from frostbite. Throughout the day, whether you're praying, eating, or performing labour, the overarching goal is to not be noticed, to blend into the quiet, anonymous mass of monks, to avoid drawing attention to yourself through excessive piety, through a stray laugh, through a moment of weakness. You're discouraged from individual expression, from personal ambition. The ideal monk is a silent, diligent, almost invisible figure, a living prayer. You're not allowed to be too devout. That would smack of pride, a cardinal sin. And you're certainly not allowed to be too human. That would betray the very vows you took. You exist in a delicate balance, a quiet tightrope walk between spiritual fervour and anonymous humility. It's a strange form of psychological suppression, where the goal is to become perfectly unremarkable, perfectly compliant, perfectly holy, and utterly, thoroughly exhausted. You arrived with whatever paltry possessions you had, perhaps a well-worn tunic, a small bag of coins, a sentimental trinket from your past. All of it is now gone, vanished, distributed if it was deemed useful, or simply discarded if it was not. Here, in the quiet, echoing stone of the monastery, you own nothing, not a single thing, not even, in a very real sense, your own name. Upon taking your vows, you likely adopted a new monastic name, severing the last fragile thread to your former identity. You are no longer Thomas, but Brother Benedict. Or Sister Agnes becomes Sister Scholastica. It's a symbolic, but deeply felt act of self-effacement. Your very being has been subsumed into the collective. Your robe, your habit, is your uniform, your prison, and your only real possession. It's fashioned from coarse, undyed wool, a fabric designed for durability, not comfort. It scratches against your skin, a constant low-grade irritation, particularly when you sweat or when the air is damp. In winter, it provides inadequate warmth, leaving you perpetually chilled to the bone. In summer, it's a heavy, suffocating shroud. There are no pockets, no hidden compartments for secret stashes of forbidden biscuits. It is plain, unadorned, and identical to the habits of every other monk. Your individuality, even in sartorial expression, has been eradicated. It's the ultimate anti-fashion statement, worn literally until it falls apart. Your belt is not a stylish leather accessory, but a simple rope or a strip of coarse cloth. It cinches your habit at the waist, a constant reminder of your vow of poverty and the need for humility. You might find yourself unconsciously tightening it when hunger gnaws, a futile attempt to silence the rumbling in your gut. It's utilitarian, unadorned, and probably chafes. Your pillow, if you're even granted such a luxury, is likely a block of wood or a small sack filled with straw. It offers no give, no softness, just a hard, unyielding surface for your aching head. Sleep is not meant to be comfortable. It is meant to be functional, a brief respite before the next round of prayers. Your body learns to conform to discomfort, accepting it as a constant companion. You'll wake with a crick in your neck and the vague sensation that you've just wrestled a small boulder in your sleep. When it comes to writing tools, forget elegant quills and polished inkwells. If you're fortunate enough to be assigned to the scriptorium, a coveted and surprisingly brutal task, your tools are rudimentary. Your quill will be a sharpened goose feather, stiff and prone to splitting, requiring constant retrimming. Your ink will be made from gallnuts, soot and binding agents, often smelling faintly of mould or something vaguely organic. It fades over time, or blobs unexpectedly. Your writing surface will be vellum or parchment, prepared animal skin, laboriously scraped and stretched. It's a far cry from paper, with its imperfections and resistance to smooth gliding. Each stroke is a physical effort, a testament to dedication. Your one true luxury, if you can even call it that, is a half-melted candle stub. This tiny, precious beacon, perhaps gleaned from the church after Matins, is your only source of personal light after dark. It illuminates a few inches around you, allowing you to perhaps read a small prayer book, or simply to stare into the flickering flame and contemplate the vast, overwhelming darkness beyond its tiny radius. It burns down quickly, a constant, tangible reminder of the passage of time and the fleeting nature of comfort. You guard it jealously, knowing that once it's gone, you are plunged back into the profound, oppressive blackness of the monastic night. You own nothing. Every object you touch, every tool you use belongs to the community, to God. This radical divestment of personal possessions isn't just about poverty. It's about severing the ties that bind you to the material world, to ego, to desire. It's about becoming utterly unburdened, unencumbered, and in a very real sense, utterly dependent. You are, in essence, a walking, breathing testament to minimalism, medieval style. And it's about as comfortable as it sounds. Your life here is a carefully calibrated balance of prayer and physical exertion. There's an old monastic saying, ora et labora, pray and work, and you will do both, relentlessly, until your body aches and your spirit yearns for something, anything, other than more work or more prayer. Your job description here is surprisingly varied, yet universally demanding. You're not merely a spiritual vessel, you're a farmhand, a cleaner, a scribe, a cook, a handyman, all rolled into one humble, silently suffering package. Your primary duty, of course, is to pray. This isn't just about showing up for the canonical hours. It's about cultivating a perpetual state of prayer, a constant dialogue with the divine, even while you're scraping wax or scrubbing out a pot. You chant, you kneel, you prostrate yourself. You meditate on the lives of saints, on the teachings of the Church Fathers, on your own inherent sinfulness. Your mind is meant to be a constant echo chamber of piety. This can be surprisingly taxing. Try thinking holy thoughts for 16 hours straight while dealing with chilblains. It's not easy. Then there's the relentless scraping. The monastery is made of stone, and stone, particularly in the dark and damp medieval environment, tends to accumulate things, like wax. Candle wax dripping from countless services hardening on the flagstones. It's your job to scrape it off inch by agonizing inch with a small, dull metal tool. The sound is a monotonous scrap, 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 echoing through the cloisters. It's a task designed to be mind-numbingly repetitive, a meditation on futility and persistence. You'll develop an intimate knowledge of the texture of cold stone and the stubborn adherence of dried wax. You will chant until your throat is raw. Not just during services, but sometimes as you work, a low, tuneless hum to keep your mind focused on the divine. The sound becomes part of the fabric of the monastery, a perpetual low-frequency vibration of devotion. It's like a medieval white noise machine, designed to drown out any thoughts of escape or desire. And you will labour. This is where the physical discomfort really kicks in. Many monasteries were self-sufficient, meaning the monks were responsible for everything from growing their own food to maintaining their own buildings. You might find yourself tending bees, a surprisingly delicate and often painful task, shrouded in protective gear, or not, if the abbot is feeling particularly ascetic, as you coax honey and wax from the buzzing colonies. You might be assigned to the kitchen, stirring vast, bubbling cauldrons of gruel, or preparing meagre meals, the heat and steam mingling with the ever-present chill of the stone. Perhaps you'll be on cleaning duty, which in a medieval monastery means far more than just tidying up. It means shoveling out the latrine pits, a truly humbling and malodorous task. It means scrubbing the crypts, a grim and unsettling duty amidst the bones of generations of departed monks. It means sweeping vast stone corridors, kicking up dust that seems to have settled for centuries. It's less cleaning and more excavating. The more fortunate among you, those with a steady hand and a tolerance for eye strain, might find themselves in the scriptorium. This is the monastery's intellectual heart, where texts are copied, illuminated, and preserved. Here, you will spend hours hunched over a lectern, copying psalms, biblical texts, or the works of ancient philosophers, stroke by painstaking stroke. Your hand will cramp, your back will ache, and your eyes will blur in the dim, flickering light. The ink smells faintly of gall nuts, and the parchment resists your every effort. It's an immense privilege, but also a brutal test of endurance and patience. You are a human printing press, slow and fallible, but imbued with a profound sense of purpose. Each copied word is a prayer in itself, a testament to faith and preservation. For the rest, it's back to the more mundane, physically demanding tasks. You might be out in the fields, digging ditches, harvesting meagre crops, or tending to the monastery's livestock. You might be chopping wood for the communal fires, your muscles straining with each swing of the axe. The work is rarely glamorous, often monotonous, and always physically draining. You are quite literally shoveling spiritual growth into stone corridors, one aching muscle at a time. The physical labour is not just about maintenance, it's about humility, about keeping your body subdued, about reminding you that you are a servant, not a master, of your own flesh. And every night, as you collapse onto your hard pallet, your muscles screaming in protest, you'll be reminded that even in seeking a spiritual life, your body remains stubbornly, painfully human. There are no performance reviews in the monastery, no annual bonuses, no Employee of the Month plaques for the monk who chanted the loudest or scraped the most wax. There are no medals for enduring the cold, no promotions for mastering the art of silent eating. Your rewards are entirely spiritual, which, as it turns out, don't pay the bills or provide much in the way of immediate gratification. And the emotional cost of this life? It's a slow, insidious erosion, a gradual surrender of everything that once made you you. You cannot laugh freely. A spontaneous burst of mirth, a genuine chuckle, is highly frowned upon. It disrupts the sacred silence, signals a lack of solemnity, and suggests a worldly attachment to frivolous joy. Laughter, in this context, is seen as a dangerous indulgence, a crack in the carefully constructed facade of piety. Your smile becomes a subtle, almost imperceptible twitch of the lips, a fleeting shadow. Your sense of humour, once a vibrant part of your personality, slowly atrophies from disuse, replaced by a dry, internal sarcasm that no one else will ever hear. You cannot hoard crusts, or anything for that matter. The concept of personal property is utterly alien. Every crust of bread, every candle stub, every thread of your habit belongs to the community. To attempt to save a scrap of food, to squirrel away a small comfort, is a direct violation of your vow of poverty and an act of selfish attachment. It speaks of a lack of faith in God's provision, or worse, a lack of trust in your fellow monks. Someone will notice. Someone always notices. The monastery is a small insular world, where everything you do, or don't do, is observed. You cannot dream about Sister Agnes, or Brother Thomas, or anyone outside the rigid confines of your spiritual path. Thoughts of carnal desire, of worldly attachments, of anything that isn't focused on God, are considered temptations, snares of the devil. You're expected to banish them, to crush them with prayer and penance. Even in your sleep, your dreams are supposed to be chaste and pious. If you find yourself stirring with unholy thoughts, the guilt will gnaw at you, leading to self-reproach and additional penance. Your mind is meant to be a fortress against sin, and every impure thought is a breach in its walls. It's a psychological battlefield, fought entirely within the confines of your own skull. The most profound consequence, the most significant emotional cost, is this: you slowly, inexorably, lose your outside identity. The person you were before you walked through those great oak doors begins to fade. Your old name is gone. Your former family, your friends, your past experiences, they become distant, hazy memories, increasingly irrelevant in the face of the rigid, repetitive present. Your individual quirks, your personal ambitions, your unique way of seeing the world, they're all sanded down, smoothed out, until you're a perfect anonymous cog in the monastic machine. This isn't an accident, this is the goal. The spiritual ideal is to shed the ego, to become utterly humble, to erase the self in order to become fully absorbed in God, to become a vessel for the divine, free of the impurities of personal desire and worldly attachment. You are supposed to die to yourself, so that only the monk, the servant of God remains. It's a profound spiritual transformation, yes, but it's also a deeply unsettling process of psychological erasure. You are, in essence, becoming a spiritual blank slate, ready to be inscribed only with the will of God and the dictates of the abbot. The quiet, repetitive routine, the constant silence, the lack of personal possessions, the suppression of emotion, all of it works in concert to achieve this erasure. And as your old self diminishes, a new, strangely empty, yet strangely peaceful self begins to emerge. You are nobody. And in this context, being nobody is the holiest thing you can be. In the monastic life, the definitions of failure and success are radically different from the outside world. There are no grand triumphs, no public accolades. Your achievements are subtle, internal, and often imperceptible to anyone but yourself and perhaps God. If you succeed, you vanish, you fade into the collective. Your greatest success is to become perfectly unremarkable, perfectly integrated into the monastic rhythm. You become a seamless part of the silent, prayerful hum of the community. Your individual desires, your personal thoughts, your very ego, all are submerged, drowned out by the constant tide of prayer, labour, and humility. You become a living, breathing testament to self-abnegation. You're the monk who never draws attention to himself, who always knows the right psalm, who never complains about the gruel, who perfectly embodies the monastic ideal. Your name, the one given to you upon taking your vows, might be remembered in the monastery's necrology upon your death, a simple entry. Brother Benedict died on the Ides of March, 1242. May he rest in peace. No epitaphs celebrating your wit, your charm, or your worldly accomplishments. Just a quiet acknowledgement of your journey to oblivion. This is the ultimate victory, to become nothing so that God can be everything. It's like being the most perfectly aligned gear in a very large, very old clock. Essential, but utterly anonymous. If you fail, the consequences are less dramatic than outright expulsion, though that could happen for truly egregious sins like stealing the abbot's private stash of dried figs. More often, failure manifests as a series of small, humiliating penances. You might be assigned to scrub floors for a week, not with a mop, but likely on your hands and knees, with a rough brush and cold water. This isn't just about cleaning. It's about humbling yourself, physically demonstrating your submission and penitence. Your knees will ache, your hands will be raw, and every crevice of the stone floor will become intimately familiar. It's a very literal form of hitting rock bottom. Or perhaps you'll be assigned to wash dishes in the scullery, plunging your hands into greasy cold water, scraping off remnants of gruel, or to tend the pigs, mucking out their stalls, enduring the stench and the grunts. These are not just chores. They're deliberate acts of mortification, designed to break your pride and remind you of your place. And then there's the internal penance. You must reflect on your wicked thoughts. If you are caught daydreaming during a service, or muttering under your breath, or betraying a flicker of desire in your eyes, you will be publicly reprimanded, often in front of the entire community. You will be expected to acknowledge your sin, to repent, and to offer up additional prayers or fasts as atonement. The guilt, a constant companion in this life, will press down on you, reminding you of your human failings, your spiritual inadequacies. It's a self-inflicted spiritual waterboarding, where your own conscience is the torturer. Your greatest achievement, the quiet zenith of your monastic existence, is simply staying awake during matins without questioning your life choices aloud. Or, indeed, silently. To endure the freezing cold of the pre-dawn church, the endless chanting, the aching knees, and to not once allow your mind to wander to the warmth of a fire, the taste of a hot meal, or the image of a soft bed. To suppress the yearning for individuality, for comfort, for anything other than the relentless pursuit of the divine. It's a quiet victory of will, a triumph of endurance over the persistent whisper of human desire. Each day, each hour, each moment you manage to maintain this unwavering, uncomplaining devotion is a success. And the reward? More of the same until the day you finally enter the ultimate silence. You came here, a refugee from a world that offered too much or not enough. You gave everything, your name, your past, your comfort, your very identity, in exchange for stillness, for structure, for the faint, elusive promise of salvation. And in that stillness something truly shifts. The cacophony of the outside world, the demands of your ego, the endless chatter of your own desires slowly, imperceptibly begin to recede. The scratch of your wool habit against your skin, once an annoyance, becomes simply a sensation. The gnawing hunger, once a torment, becomes a familiar companion. The cold stone under your bare feet, once a shock, becomes the expected. The silence, once oppressive, begins to fill with a different kind of sound. The quiet rhythm of your own breath, the faint echo of centuries of prayer, the whisper of a wind through the cloister arches. You are no one. No longer the son of a lord, or the victim of plague, or the one with a broken heart. You are simply a monk, a servant, a vessel. And in that profound anonymity, in that utter lack of self, you paradoxically become something else. Holy. You're living proof of a radical devotion, a life stripped bare of all but the most essential elements: prayer, humility, and endurance. You're here, you've endured, you have surrendered, and maybe, just maybe, if heaven is feeling particularly generous tonight, after another long day of silence, scrubbing, and chanting, you'll finally get 6 consecutive hours of sleep. A small luxury, perhaps, but for a monk it's akin to paradise. The quiet here, it echoes forever.